Mixing, it's something that we all tend to grapple with when it comes to home recording, but does it have to be as complicated as we make it sometimes? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this week's Studio Live Today podcast, because I'm going to give you 10 simple but effective ways that might enhance your mixing experience in the home studio. Hello, my name is Pete Johns. Welcome back to the Studio Live Today podcast, or maybe welcome for the very first time. We're right in the middle of something called Songtember. That's our Song in a Month challenge around here, where I and you, many of you, create, record, and release a song all within the month of September. And I'm at the point now where I'm doing my final mix of my song, which is kind of an important stage because we need to get our levels balanced. We need to make sure our effects are all in order. And I thought I would share a few of the things that I've learned over time that help me when I get to this phase, because it can be quite overwhelming, especially if you're using a digital audio workstation like Logic Pro. I moved to Logic Pro on iPad a couple of years ago after using GarageBand on iOS for so long. Yes, it's got a lot more features, but with that comes some complexity. So I wanted to simplify things down here and go through some ideas. So let's start at the place we like to start, which is number one. Number one is to make sure that before you start mixing, you've done your tops and tails. What are your tops and tails? Well, that means going through all of your tracks and making sure that at the start of your track, you've trimmed off anything that you might not need. So you don't need to go right up to the very front if you're using this. But those listening on the audio version, what I'm doing is I'm trimming off the front of some tracks. So I've got some guitar tracks here, and I'm just trimming off the front so that when we actually play these, let's play these guitar tracks, there's going to be some silence in front before they jump in. Let's take a listen. So if we don't do that, it's not the end of the world, but you tend to find that you just get that sort of hiss and that background noise. And if it's a vocal track, maybe you're like, you're coughing or something like that, and you don't need that. The other part you need to do is look at the inside. So if there's little parts here where an instrument's not playing or you're not singing, make sure that you trim out those parts. Again, you don't need that build-up of additional noise. It's unnecessary to have in there. And then, of course, the whole tails part of tops and tails means going to the very end of your project and making sure your things are dropped off at the end. So let's hear these guitars at the end of the project. And you can hear there that they chop off a little bit abruptly there. So what we will need to do is use a little automation at the end of that to actually drop it down. More on that in just a moment. I'm going to show you about that. In fact, let's jump into it right now. So once you've done your tops and your tails, you may want to use some automation, not just for your fade-ins and fade-outs, which we'll cover next, but you might also want to automate the volume up and down if you've got something that is coming in. So, for example, I've got a guitar solo in this track that kicks in the middle of the track. And what I want to do is when the guitar solo kicks in, I want the rhythm guitar to actually drop down in volume. So this is the section where it comes in. So what I can actually do is, instead of using, don't move that. I just did for those again listening in, you're going to hear some whoops, ups and downs. I want to actually do this. Now, there's a couple of ways I could handle this. I could actually move all of this audio onto a separate duplicate track and then change the volume of that one, or I can use automation, which can be really handy. So I'm going to grab this track. And the same can apply to many other digital audio workstations. But here on Logic Pro, there's a little automation tab up the top here. What we're going to do is grab this rhythm guitar that we want to turn down, make sure that's selected. We're going to turn automation off. The reason we turn that off is we don't want it to be reading or writing any automation. So we're going to leave that off. And all we're going to do is add in some automation points. So just before this solo, I need a point, and then another point there. And then at the end, when the solo is done and we want this to come back up, we need to do some more points here. So we can add another couple of points. And this is just for example purposes. You can move these around to your heart's content. But what I'm going to do is grab all of that. That didn't add the point where I wanted it to. Point. I'm going to grab this whole section and actually move the volume down. So I'm going to grab on this bar in between, like so, and drag it on down so that it's adding a point there. I've got to move it by the points. See, this is where someone who's used GarageBand for so long can get a little bit lost in this. Let's turn that off again. And we're on the wrong track here as well. We're on our lead guitar. That's why I was confused before. Let's just undo, undo, undo. Undo is your friend. If I'm going to give you an additional tip, it's to use your undo when you get yourself caught up like I just did. So I was on the wrong track, which is why I didn't have my little automation points in the right spot. So let's add the automation points in again. And again, we'll move this down, and then we'll come to the front here and move this down. I'm leaving all this in because this is what I said. Like, I'm not an expert in this. I'm learning as I go along as well. So you can learn along with Johns. So what this is now going to do is it's going to reduce the volume of this rhythm guitar as the lead guitar comes in. Let's take a listen. And here's the point where that rhythm guitar. So we're creating some space in there by using automation so that our lead guitar, our solo, can come on through. So that is your automation. The other thing you can do with automation is you fade in and you fade out. So let's talk about fade in and fade out as number 3 tip here. So to fade out a track, to go to the very end here, we want to use that automation trick again. So we've got these lead guitars. Remember these lead guitars we showed just a moment ago? We'll solo them out here. They did this. They end really abruptly there. We don't want that abrupt end. We want an automated end here. So once again, we're going to tap on the tracks. We're going to go into automation. I'm just going to turn the automation off here so it won't be reading from it. And then we'll tap again. Okay, I said I was going to go unedited, but I did save you the misery of going through me tapping over and over again, and then remembering that I wasn't in the pencil mode, I was in the move mode. So when you're doing automation, of course, you'd remember this from before. We'll turn those both off again. You need to actually tap on the pencil icon to add in your automation. So we can tap our points in, which we'll do on both of these lead guitar tracks. So we're tapping a point just before the end and then right at the end. And then we're going to our move mode. And this is the problem I was having before why I was getting into so much trouble, is that I didn't actually change into move mode. I left it on that automation mode. So now that we've added a little fade out automation, let's take a listen. And this is where we need to turn it back on. So we do need to put it on to read mode. See, I'm learning as we go along here. It's so different to what we've used before. There you go. So there's the automation going down. I got confused because you definitely don't want this on latch or touch or any of the write modes, but you do need it to be reading. Otherwise, it won't actually automate. We should probably go back to my previous one that I did before and make sure that the read's on for that one with the automation. So there's our fade out. Now, you can also fade things in. If we go to the very front of our track, I have this intro distortion, which if we solo, that sounds like this. So if what I wanted to do is actually make this more of a fade in, I can actually do the same thing here. So let's do it properly this time. Yeah, this is supposed to be tips to help you, but really, I'm the one who needs the tips. So let's this time fade this between the start and this point here. So I've added the pencil, I've added the modes, I go to move mode, and then I'm going to move the volume up. So it's going to start right down. The little distortion thing's going to hit in there, and it's going to kind of raise up, which I think will sound cooler at the start of this track. Let's take a listen. Here it is. Pretty cool, yeah. And if we bring this back in, so we'll just unsolo the rest of these. By the way, your master solo button in Logic Pro is at the top here. So let's come out of automation mode because Pete gets very confused over there. And let's listen to the start of this track now with this fade in, like so. It just gives it a little bit more presence coming in there at the start. And then let's listen to this fade out at the end. now that we've faded out these lead guitars right at the end here. Let's select yeah, need to work on that a little bit because we have that cool bass bit at the end there. So we might just want to adjust those and just fade them out a little bit less than that. Where was the point where we ruined the automation before? Before we move on to number 4, let's do this. Memo to self, yeah, so it's not actually reading the automation. So it's if the automation off, and you can see it because it's grey, but now if we read, then it means that when we get to a section, it is actually going to do the automation that we asked it to do. Let's get out of automation and let's talk about number 4, which is plugin order. Now, there's lots of plugins across lots of these tracks, and because this is the simple guide, we're not going to go into the details of all of these plugins. But one thing I did want to raise here is that the order of your plugins matters. So if we look at a guitar that I've got here, it's got a noise gate, then it's got pedal board, it's got amp designer, it's got compressor, it's got platinum reverb, and it's got channel EQ. So it's got all of those in a row. If we wanted to move these around, we could actually edit them and move them around. I'm going to use my vocal this time around to show you this because there's something I want to actually do with my vocal because my vocal at the moment has a plug-in chain. Actually, let's take a step back here because this is supposed to be a tips podcast. So to go to your plugins, you select the track. You tap on the plugins button at the bottom here. Different DAWs are different, but they all use basically the same functionality, which is plugins go from left to right or up to down, depending how you're looking at them. So in this particular case, I've got this exciter. This exciter is at the very end of my chain at the moment, which means it's going through this reverb and this delay before it actually gets to the exciter. And you can actually get quite a different sound based on where you put those plugins. So let's listen to this vocal with the exciter at the end, which gives it that little bit of sort of analog warmth that sounds like this. Don't need no crashes on my launch pad. Don't need no coffee for... So that's how it is at the moment. But if we want to move this, we can hit the edit button here and we can grab this exciter and excitingly bring it down here to the front. And I'll put it just behind our compressor, but before all of our delay and reverb effects. If we tap the edit button again, you can see there's the exciter now. Now let's listen to that same bit of vocal again, but now with the exciter at the front of the chain. Don't need no crashes on my launch pad. Don't need no coffee for my cream. No. So now it's only doing the exciting on the signal before it adds all that delay and reverb, which can actually help out. So there's no one right way to do this. Usually you want kind of your compression up front, your reverb delays and colorization stuff in the middle, and then some EQ at the end. But you don't have to. You can do it however you like, and you can change the order up. So plug-in order, and again, not just on Logic Pro, but any digital audio workstation you're using. And just to show you where that is here in our mixer, if you're using the mixer and you're looking at plugins, they're up the top here, and that's where they go from top to bottom. So this same vocal track that we had before, you can see we have compressor, exciter, EQ, delay, other delay, verb, more delay, and then our buses at the bottom there. So that's the order it's going to go into, which equates exactly to the left to right order if we actually go into the plugins section. So there's 2 different spots. You can see all of your plugins to see what order they're in. Let's talk about the fun idea of organization. This is the point in the mix where you will thank yourself later if you do a little bit of work to make sure that all of your track names make sense, because some of mine don't at this point in time. So this is where I want to change things up. So I've got my tracks named drums. I've got Mars bass 1 clean, Mars bass 1 fuzzy. That's okay. That's our friend Mars Capone who did those basses. I'm going to leave his name on them because he deserves it. We've got guitar rhythm, guitar lead left, guitar lead right. We've got guitar solo. So everything's pretty good so far. We've got Vox lead. Now these are some old vocals that no longer need to be here. So bonus tip, if you have stuff like this, get rid of it. We're at the business end here. We don't need to keep things for posterity. And if we're going to raise automation data, if you've done what I've said and actually made sure that you use backup versions, use use version control to make sure that you have multiple versions of your projects. And if you don't know what that means, if I jump out of this one, you'll see here that I'm at version 18 of this. We've got version 17, 16, 15, all the way back to version 1. And what I do is basically every day I duplicate out to get a new version. That means if we delete things out, they're going to be saved in those previous versions. And obviously your disk space will depend on this a little bit, but version control for the win. So if we don't like, so for instance, I've got some tracks down here where I've got my vocal double and then my vocal triple, but this vocal triple is actually something different. Let's see what this is.
Don't need no crashes on my launch pad.
This is an extra section I wrote in that was a spoken word part. So I used the same vocal triple vocal chain there, but I want to change the name of this. Now, the easiest way to change the name is to actually go to your inspector over here and then come out of region, go back to track view, and then tap here, and we'll call this Vox Spoken. So this is just, again, just to clean things up so that when you get to mix 1, mix 2, mix 3, final mix 2, final mix really serious this time, you know the joke, then you've actually got everything in order. It's also great if you're going to share these. I'm going to share these stems out and allow people to remix this track. Yeah, I might remember what I put where, but other people won't have a clue what's going on. So being able to put where the lead vocal is, the doubles, the triples, and all the rest of it is going to help out. So we've got Vox intro 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got my na-na-nas 1 and 2, and we've got that intro distortion. The other thing I'd do at this stage, along with the names, is actually move things around a bit. So this intro distortion should actually come up here with the rest of our guitars so that we can actually see that when we start the track, we can see the distortion actually going into that first section. So changing up your names, and I guess a bonus tip there is changing up those order of things. Another thing you can do, and tip number 6, if you're so inclined, if you're a color-coded kind of person, what you might want to do is change things up. Now you can see I've got a little bit of color coding here. I've got my vocals in blue and I've got my guitars in this other different blue. But what if you wanted to change that up? Let's just say I wanted my bass to be purple because purple is cool. Well, we can do that here in Logic Pro. Many other DAWs are the same. In Logic, we tap on the inspector once again and go out of region, come back to here. And instead of this color here, let's make it more of a pinky purple kind of color. And we'll make it sort of a bit dulled hue there. Why didn't that change? Those watching along at home are going, yeah, that didn't work. So that changed our track over here. We did want the region setting that we were in before. So if we tap on the region, that is where we can actually change the color of the regions as well. So we'll choose this pinky purpley color, and we can do that on each of these. So if we just go through and we tap the same one for our second one, we'll need to select the whole thing. If you select the whole track, you can actually do it for the entire region. If we go into there to color and tap it, there you go. So if you select on an individual region, you can actually change them. You can have multicolored regions across the same track, but that's no good for us. I will make the track icon over here on the far left the same again. So if we go back to track, we can go into colors there and change the color there. So now I've actually got a different color for my bass than what I do for my guitars and for my vocals. And it can just make things a little easier to see when you're getting to this mixing stage. You can really quickly, because the bass icon looks kind of like the guitar icon. And of course, you can change the icons too if you want to go really crazy with it. But now at least I know where my bass is compared to my guitars and compared to my vocals, as well as the drums being in green here. So that's another option that you have is your track colors. A handy dandy place to mix things, and I did a video on this just recently. You can check that one out in the description if you want a more detailed view of it, but is to use your channel strip as your volume. There's 3 places, in fact, to adjust volume. You can adjust volume right here on the main window, just with your horizontal slider. You can adjust it in your mixer window, as you're probably aware of, with your complete vertical fader. But you can also go with something a little bit in between, which is your channel strip. And this is a really handy one. A lot of DAWs have this. Logic Pros is actually really good. So if I want to dial in the volume of this solo, for instance, if we play it and I try to do it out here on the main window, it's really fiddly. Let's show you. So not only is it kind of hard to see where that volume is, it gives us no indication of where the volume level is at, so we don't know what's going on there. What we can do is use the channel strip button. Down in the bottom left here, we hit the channel strip, and now we can use this to turn up and down. And not only has it got a lot more range for us to turn it up and down, but when we do so, up the top, just above, it's got the readout of how many dBs it is. And also, up over here, if we move it, right up here at the top, it tells us the actual level. So we can make really finite changes here. So if I was going to dial in the volume of this one, using the channel strip instead of the fader on the front screen, it's just really super precise. And if you want to make really small incremental changes, you can use the mixer. And the mixer has a volume setting where you can actually tap and dial it in. And again, I show that in more detail in the other video. We've got 60 plus Logic Pro tutorials now. So if you're learning Logic Pro for iPad, and clearly I need to go back and watch some of them, particularly the automation one, then you could jump into the description. While you're down there, leave us a comment if you're watching this one live or on the replay, or you're listening to the podcast. Of course, you can't leave a comment and you can't check the description, but you can come and watch the video version. If you listen to this on the podcast and you're like, oh, I'd really like to see what Johns is doing there, you can come on over to the video version and check it out. Got a few more tips here for you. One thing that confuses the absolute crud out of me is buses. So I thought I'd spend a little sliver of time here talking about sends and buses. So you will notice that on my track, because this came over from GarageBand, it has an echo, which is a delay, and it also has a reverb bus here. So all that these are doing is taking tracks that we already have over here and sending a small amount, or however much we choose, to these buses. And you can see, to view these, you need to be on your mixer view. And at the top of your mixer, right in between your plugins and your volume and panning controls, you'll see that there's bus 1 and bus 2. So we can see the bus 1 is everything going into the echo bus, and bus 2 is everything going into the reverb bus. So if I wanted to turn up how much, so if we go to our lead vocal, which we can identify because we've very carefully named all of these, and we solo this, we can hit play and we can actually adjust how much is going to both the echo and the reverb. Let's show you. It helps if we find a part where the vocal is actually playing, which we'll do now.
Don't need no crashes on my launch pad. Don't need no coffee for my cream, I'm quite okay. Don't need no harshes on that.
So for those listening along, you would have heard, look, there's a bunch of delays and reverbs that are directly on the track as well, but this is like a slap back delay kind of echo, and as I turned up bus 1, you can hear I get a really big change to that effect.
That head buzz.
You can really hear that coming through. So that's all that does, and buses don't have to be any more complicated than that. Or here's the thing, you don't have to use them at all. If you turn everything down to 0 and just put your plugins directly on each of your tracks, that's an absolutely fine and acceptable way to do it. The reason buses are kind of cool is that you can put a little bit of everything through those same buses. So through my vocal chain here, all of my vocals are going a little bit through that delay and reverb, and I can mix and match the amount that I want there. It also means that I can come back over here to my guitars and make sure that a little bit of all of my guitars is also going through that same reverb. And this is what's going to create a great room sound. I can even come to my drums, which have been put in a stack here, and you'll see I've got my snare going into that same bus too. I don't have things like my hi-hat, and maybe I want that. So maybe I need to tap here on the setup mode and add a send. So to add a send is as simple as here in the mixer, go from your mixer mode to your setup mode, and you'll see that there's a little plus sends button here. So I've got this closed hi-hat. I want to put a plus send. I want to send it to a bus. I want to send it to the reverb bus. And then I can just turn a little bit of that cymbal up, and then I'm going to get a little bit more of that sound. So here's the snare drum. Listen to the snare reverbing.
Sometimes I feel so chill, it makes me want to scream.
Bring the cymbal in here. Wrong section, and we've still got that vocal soloed. Let's come over and get rid of that vocal being soloed so we can just hear these drums. See, there's that drum reverb. We're not using the closed hi-hat in this part, but you get the gist here. If we wanted to add it to other parts of the drum kit, and everything except your bass and your kick drum, you probably want a little bit of that going into your reverb. It's just going to help glue your track together. Now, here's a little pro tip when you're using buses. If you want to hear how much is in that bus, and what's going in there, a cool way to do that is to solo the bus. Yeah, we can solo just the bus. So let's make sure we've unsoloed those drums and come across and solo the echo bus. And let's have a listen to just what's in the delay bus. Pretty cool, yeah? So you can hear just what is in that delay bus and what's being sent into there. And we can even turn the entire bus up and down here. So if we're like, I like the amounts that are going in there from each channel, but I want less of it, we can turn it down. So let's again play. Let's turn it down. So we're hearing less of it come through there. The same with our reverb. We can solo and hear what's actually happening on our reverb bus like this. So you can hear that snare reverb coming through there. And you can even do cool things like putting EQ and changing up and adding additional effects here. But I just wanted to show you that buses are not that scary. You can ride the bus. They're not that scary, and you don't have to use them. But if you do, all it means is it's sending a little bit of sending that signal, a little bit of that signal into an effect, and then you can decide how much is going of each track, and then how much that effect is overall. Number 9, this is one that I've been playing with on this track because the more I listen to this, the more I realize that when I sung the original vocal, I was a little bit out of time. I think there was some latency in the feedback. I was singing through quite a lot of delay and reverb, and I think I'm a little bit late on these, especially where I go, oh, I've got a lot to learn. Take a listen to this and see if you agree with me. So let's listen to this chorus section. Is it just me, or does that sound like just a 10 milliseconds late, something like that? So here's the cool thing. Because we've got a digital audio workstation here, we can zoom into whatever level we like. So if you slide your fingers, if you take your 2 fingers and you separate them apart, we can come into some pretty close proximity stuff, which means we can experiment with this a little. If we think that we need to compensate for a bit of latency, we can actually tap this and just drag it a little bit to the left or the right. You've got to kind of tap and drag it a bit quickly, because if you hold down on it, other things happen. But if I drag this to the right while zoomed in here, let's listen to that same section again and see if this is going to be a little bit more in the pocket. No, because we moved it to the right, didn't we? We wanted to move it to the left. We wanted to make it a little earlier. Now, while you're playing around with this, keep your undo in mind. So I'm going to hit the undo button to make sure I move it back to the original place. And remember, you don't want to mess this up. Make sure you've duplicated out your project. Make sure you got that version control in place, because you can very easily make things much, much worse very quickly. But let's just drag this time over to the left and take a listen to this. See if this is going to compensate for a little bit of that latency that we had. There you go. Doesn't that just sound a little bit more on the money in terms of the timing? And of course, we could do the same changes to all of our other sections. We could just zoom back in to the same level that we're at before and move things around. So let's just move this for this previous verse as well and take that back and just see if this is going to work better. Don't need no people asking questions. I take my own. Okay, that time it went probably a little bit too early, because we did 2 notches there. So we could just move it back just to find the right spot. Don't need no people asking questions. I take my own advice. It always sets me straight. Don't want no it. I think that works a lot better. Now, I could also adjust my doubles, or maybe I don't need to, because having that little bit of delay between your original vocal and your vocal doubles can actually help add a little thickness. So if I wanted to add some additional Allen thick, I can do that. Don't ever add Robin Thicke. You'll regret it instantly. And again, if you mess everything up completely, go back to your previous versions because you've got version control, right? I've told you a couple of times to make sure you're using version control. I'm just going to move these last couple down here just while I'm remembering to do it. And you'll be able to see the gaps that you've created between your different sections there. So yeah, there's a cool way that you don't have to live with it. The reason that digital is cool is you don't have to be cutting up pieces of tape and gluing them back together like we did in the old days. Grandpa, yes, Grandpa, whatever you say, Grandpa. But it means that you've got control over things like that. That if something's not quite sound, same with guitars. If your guitar's not quite right, and look, you can go nuts with this. You can go in and do minuscule changes. You can chop up and move every single note so that they're all right on the grid, and you'll suck the life out of it completely. You don't want to do that. Number 10 tip for mixing, and this one I can only talk about. I can't really show you here, and that is to listen to your mix without access to your device. So, what do I mean? I mean, we're going to export the mix. So for this one here in Logic Pro, you tap and you go export and you send this out. Now, I'd say send it as an uncompressed WAV file if you can. You can do compressed if you want to, if you've got small space and you want to just throw an M4A, like a compressed audio file to listen to what it will sound like compressed. But you can send this out and take a listen to what it sounds like. And do a few things. Take it to a small speaker. Play it through headphones. Take it to the larger speaker you can. Play it in your car, the old car listen. Play it from a distance. So play it in this room, walk out to another room and see what it sounds like out there. Surprisingly, you can pick out different things and turn the volume way down low. Because if something only sounds good when it's cranked up to 11, there's probably some things you need to tweak around EQ and other frequencies that might actually help. What do you think? Have you got ideas here? I know, look, we didn't talk EQ, we didn't talk compression, we didn't talk about how and what effects to add. There's a heap of videos about that. I wanted to really bring it all back to the basics because at the end of the day, did you know that mix engineers used to be called balance engineers? Because all they really were concerned about was balancing the level of audio between the 4 tracks that they may have had. They may have had a drum track, a guitar track, a bass track, and a vocal track. And they may have just been mixing to make sure that they all worked well and sounded good together. So don't underestimate some of the simple things, your basic editing, making sure that your tracks are named, making sure you got those colors in there if you want to do it that way. All these things will help you out in the long run and they'll make your mixing process less painful and a lot more fun in the long run. But please do let me know your thoughts, any tips that you have, because again, as we've learned from this podcast, I'm far from an expert, especially when it comes to the software side of things. But yeah, if you've got ideas and you've got things that you do on every single mix that you think will help out the community, let us know. Drop those in the comments if you're watching the video version. You can find all the ways you can interact with me and with the whole community at studiolivetoday.com. And until next time, folks, be kind to yourself. Be kind to others. Keep creating, and I'll see you next time right here on the Studio Live Today podcast.